What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hartness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Murray Guest, and we talk about strength finding and how the awareness of our own personal strengths and those of our participants can help us to achieve better in shorter time. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, why don't you visit workshops.org and download my one-page summary? So enjoy the show. Hello, Murray. Welcome to the show.
I am feeling really good about just connecting with you. We had such a nice chat a few weeks back. In these times, it could have been yesterday or 6 months ago. Who knows? Weeks are going like days. But I am reflecting on that conversation and how much your energy and what you bring to what you do in the podcast and how much I loved our connection. And I'm looking forward to this episode of the podcast. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Yeah, this exploration call, how I like to name it, was indeed inspiring. And I already learned a few bits and pieces, and I'm excited to dive deeper. And we're going to talk about strength and how to focus on the participants' strengths and to use this for workshops and facilitation. And before we dive into that, I'd be curious to hear, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
So I worked for Mars Incorporated, which is locally here in Australia, Master Foods. And I worked for them for 11 years. So 2 years manufacturing, making the food in the factory. And I think there's a couple in Germany and Netherlands. There's one, so over your way in Europe. So 2 years making the food, then 9 years as a quality assurance manager. So I taste the food every morning and only little bits, thankfully. And my position was made redundant. And I remember approaching a training company that we used where I'd done high performance coaching and some other team cultural events and experiential workshops. And I went to this training manager, the owner of the business. And I remember saying to him, "Do you remember that loud guy on one of the programs?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, that was me." He goes, "Yeah, I remember you." I said, "Can I have a job?" And Miriam, it's one of those things I think in life, someone saw something in me, and when leaders see something in someone and they give that person a chance. And he gave me a chance, and I got the chance to join that training company. And in 2007, so I'd say 13 years ago, I learned facilitation, coaching, running workshops through this company, and it put me on the path to being a facilitator, a coach, and for a period of time, a learning and development manager. But while I was a learning development manager, I still love to go out and facilitate, not just manage the training. So I'd say it's been about 13 years.
Wow. And how did you know that this was your calling? Because it takes a lot of courage, I guess, to approach someone and to say, "Hey, this was me. I want to work for you. Please hire me."
Well, to be honest, and I am a very open person, at that time of my life, I'd been made redundant, or my position was made redundant. I'd recently divorced. So it was like, okay, got to just go for it. What is there in life? What lights me up? And I had a girlfriend who then became my fiancée and my wife. So there's been this change in my life. And Tammy at the time was just like, "You need to do this. I can see this is the right thing." And I don't think I would have done it without her support, because there is that responsibility sort of theme inside me, which I think a lot of people have, about having the regular income to make sure they can put food on the table. And after having a full-time job in a very good job for 11 years, it was a big decision. But I am definitely a gut person. Mm-hmm. And we talked very briefly on the discovery call about the energy in the room and that gut feeling. I say we've got to tap into that all the time in our life. And I definitely was tapping into that. And then with the support of Tammy, my wife, girlfriend at the time, then helped me make that decision. But yeah, it wasn't easy, but I'm so glad I did.
Yeah. And to be able to tap into this space and follow your gut feeling, you need to really know yourself and also to be sensitive. And we talked about that just before pressing the record button. to be sensitive to what others trigger in us. Where did you learn this self-awareness, or to follow your gut feeling and to know which gut feeling to follow? Because there are sometimes also some traps along the way.
Oh, yeah, there can be. I would say I've done a number of courses over the years, which have been valuable around knowing myself, building that self-awareness and investing in my own learning. I'd say in my early 30s is when that first started. So in Australia, and I think it's in Europe, it's in the US, a program called Landmark. And it's one of those Tony Robbins style intensive programs, 3 days, I think 8 a.m. to 10, 11 p.m. every night. So very much a deep dive in your mindset and those rackets and those frames that you run off. So I think that program early on was certainly something that really helped me. And then building off that with other programs that I then stepped into. And I do remember some conferences I went to. I've been to a number of events by Mind Valley as well. Mm-hmm. And having that feeling in my stomach where I just wanted to run out the room because I felt so challenged.
Yeah.
But I remember sitting there and saying to myself, just let it go and go with the flow and be present with it and not push aside the learning that I was getting. And I'm so glad I did that again as well. But tapping into the feeling it's a journey. I'm not saying, hey, I've got it right and I do it right all the time. But I feel like when I do, I make decisions which feel right. They're right for me at that time. I don't know about, you've got me thinking though about maybe the ones which lead me down the path which maybe aren't so helpful. So I have to come back to you on that one as well.
Yeah. And I think in these courses, as you described that, and I felt the same urge when I sat in Landmark, I just wanted to run away. And it also showed me the discomfort that I as a facilitator might put on some of the participants, and then develop an entire new form of empathy for that. And how far
it's funny. Yeah, well, I was going to say, I've facilitated hundreds of workshops and I'd say thousands of people. And I've had a few of those moments where I've, with my own energy and my own enthusiasm, let's do this activity, which is going to bring to the surface how we can work more effectively as a team and maybe unpack or magnify some of those unhelpful behaviors. And in hindsight, my enthusiasm was a little too much. And I think that's part of the learning where I hadn't fully considered where some people were in that team and what we bring to that moment in our life isn't just what happened this morning. It might have been yesterday or last week or 2 years ago or 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it doesn't matter. But in my enthusiasm, I hadn't considered that. And I have had a couple of moments, I'd say a few, where in not considering that enough, I hadn't considered that emotional, social discomfort. And as humans, we perceive social threats like physical threats. The fight, flight, or freeze will kick in. And I think that's one of the important things you and I have talked about is how valuable I've learned over the years and with anyone I talk to as a facilitator, reading the room and reading the energy in the room and going with that. And I think one of the worst things we can do as a facilitator is in a robotic fashion, just follow an agenda.
Yeah, because then we're following our goals and not the goal of the group. But to come back to your example with your enthusiasm, and I can very much relate to that because usually I come to the room, I'm very excited and I'm just looking forward also to pass on this energy. And it seems to me as it's a thin line between suppressing this energy and enthusiasm because it might disrupt some of the participants, but still remaining authentic. If I try to control myself and to almost please the group or to conform to the group, then I change something in me and my energy that will equally disrupt or impact the group.
Yeah, and I think in the past, I have finished a workshop and thought to myself, we've got there, but I don't feel like I was my true self. And I think, and I go back to Paul, who was the owner of the training company that gave me that start. I remember asking him once about the most valuable work that he's done, and we talked about that. And then he added to that conversation, and this is the part that's always stuck with me. He said he regretted doing work which wasn't aligned with his values. And I think about how important that is, and whether that's your values or just being your authentic self. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that, yes, we want to show up and be our true selves and be comfortable when we put our heads on the pillow at the end of the day that, yes, I showed up as me and the way I want to. And at the same time, how are we in a comfortable way stretching our participants so that they're in that learning zone, they're in that growth zone, but not in the full discomfort zone and want to run out the room. Yeah. So that's the skill of facilitation.
It is. And I wonder, so one of your flagship programs is strengths-based facilitation or strengths-based training. So maybe you can first give us a short introduction of what that actually means, and then how you can apply that also to bridge maybe the gap between the different participants, those who might feel comfortable with your enthusiasm and those who might feel threatened through your enthusiasm.
So 2012, I was introduced to the Clifton Strengths Framework. And so that was 8 years ago. And I have done a number of self-assessment tools over the years, as I'm sure many of your listeners have. And this tool, however, really stuck with me around focusing on what's right with people, and the work of Don Clifton, who invested over 50 years of research into come up with the Clifton Strengths Framework. When I read my top 5 strengths, I was like, this is me. I can read a description which just connects with me very deeply. And I really connected with also that approach of what is right with people rather than fixating on what's wrong with them. And that's what strengths is about. So I did that in 2012, and then 3 years later, 2015, I became qualified through Gallup as a Clifton Strengths coach. Since then, I've worked with about 2,000 people in workshops and one-on-one, helping them understand their strengths. And it's an ongoing process for myself and for the people that I help to understand what it means to know your strengths and how they help you, and also how they hinder you, how they can get in your way when you overplay them. So for a very quick example, I have communication in my top 5. No surprise, I love to talk. But you know what? Sometimes I need to keep my mouth shut and listen as well. So with that enthusiasm, it may come across so much that I just want to talk and talk and talk, or I'm so keen to talk about something, the words will come out of my mouth in the order which doesn't make sense because I'm so keen to get them out. So that's the weakness of that communication. In a facilitation point of view, I think about, if I'm at my best when I'm using my strengths, how do I consciously tap into those dominant strengths, whether it's my top 5 or top 10, and just out of reference, there's 34 themes of strength and talent that is in the report. So if we tap into those top ones, the 5 or 10, and think about, as a facilitator, how can I show up as my true authentic self and use these consciously to create an environment that's engaging, that supports learning, and be your true self. So that's what I think as a facilitator with strengths. And then for the participants, if I know their strengths, they're going to see the world, they're going to see activities, content, tools through a lens of those dominant strengths. That's how they see things. For example, you might have someone that's high in competition. So how can they bring that competitiveness in a positive way to what we're doing? Someone else might have empathy in their dominant talents. And then we'll be talking about, okay, what is that angle or that sort of way of seeing something, and the compassion and the empathy and understanding that when we talk through that, and what does it mean for a piece of content around the team, for example. And as a facilitator of running strengths workshops, I will have people complete their strengths before the workshop, and then I will have a look at those. So I'll know the very short descriptions of their strengths. However, I'm very mindful, and I think this is good for anything we do as facilitators, about holding our assumptions loosely. So I'll make some assumptions about what these strengths might mean, but I'm not going to hold on to them so tightly that it's going to put blinkers on the way I see those participants, because they're still people and everyone's different. And what I want to do is have those assumptions and go, okay, this is what it may mean, but it's not what it definitely means. And to help me understand how they may respond or how I can best serve them in a workshop. And then validating those assumptions that I've created through the workshop and through discussions and through activities. I also think that the strengths language is like thinking about it's just the very start of understanding someone. And I heard a beautiful example of this recently where someone said it's like the name of the town where someone lives. But it's not the street and it's not the house, and it's also not what's in the house. So communication may be, as I said earlier, in my top strengths, but that's just the town. I live in Communication Town. What's in Communication Town? Let's find out. What does it look like for me? How do I use it? How does it help me? How does it show up? And then we start to unpack that and explore that.
And how can I get lost in it?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I can.
And it's interesting when you mentioned the example of competitiveness as a strength. I think that's a very interesting example because I think it's one of those where it's even more appealing to see it also as a threat or as a danger. Because competitiveness can be enhancing, it can get some energy dynamics, but it can quickly shift also into a more toxic maybe is too strong.
Yeah, and with the strengths framework and the strengths-based approach, they're not switches that we turn on and off. Mm-hmm. They're a dial that we dial up and down depending on situations, relationships, tasks we might be doing. And so that competitiveness we can dial up or dial down based on what we're doing at the time. It's bringing to the awareness of the person that has that, how consciously am I dialing that up or down, or am I just going through life in a way that I'm unaware of, and that competition is then becoming a weakness and maybe inhibiting relationships or perceptions? Because the other thing is, when you think about making people right, not wrong, I want to understand that competition to this other person about what makes them right and not say that must be wrong because they've got it and I don't. Very quick example, I was working with a preschool, and the director of the preschool had competition, and she loved her competition. And she would use it to create very productive, helpful, healthy environments where the different rooms that the children were learning in, very young children, to create a healthy environment to motivate the teachers around how they're getting different development stages in place for the children. And it was such a beautiful way that she was doing it. Conversely, a training manager that I was coaching at a training company, she had competition and a couple of others which were named Command and Significance. And for her, it was about winning the training contracts that their competitors don't get. And I said to her, so does this competition drive you so that you win the work? She said, no. It drives me to put these other training providers out of business and I shut them down. Yeah.
That's a very blunt answer.
So she was really tapping into that, and there's this intersection of those top talents for her showing up in a way that was driving her success, but in a way which, and I struggle, my competition is very low. And I was like, I've got to catch my breath and think about how I want to talk about this one because, but she loved it, she owned it, and she was very much and in a way I do remember she was quite a loner that was like, I'm driven, I want to achieve. We did explore about how that is inhibiting her internally. And I think that's where the value was, but she was leveraging that internally to really drive her success.
And there's so much to unpack. How to deal with this instinctive judgment when we're confronted with a person with strengths or character traits that we cannot directly relate to, and how to still turn it into something that just is and with what we want to work.
Yeah, and as a facilitator, I think about the times I've loved the most, and it's with a team where we are shifting the energy and letting go of the past and letting go of some of that negativity and making other team members wrong, and actually seeing the brilliance that they bring and the brilliance that there's a perspective that's different to mine, and appreciating that. And that gives me goosebumps, those moments when we can bring that out, and then that's practically applied when they go back to their work.
And still having the awareness that just because it's your strengths doesn't mean that you need to impose it on others, or that you can use it as an explanation or an excuse to push through and to say, oh, that's just my strength, so I'm supposed to be competitive, so now you have to join my competition. No, how can I use, if I got you correctly from the example with the primary school, it's how can I use my strengths to design an environment where others can explore their strengths? Yes.
Yeah, and in a way that is supportive and encouraging for each person to show up at their best. Because when we tap into those strengths, we're not just being ourselves, we're actually exploring how we can be our best selves. And there's tons of research out there that Gallup and Marcus Buckingham has done around when you get to use your strengths day in, day out, you are more engaged, teams are more productive, more profitable, customer service is better, efficiency is better. And you go home each day feeling like you got to be your best self. So, that's the stuff that lights me up.
Would you design a workshop based on the participants' strengths?
That's a really good question. And I would say no, I would design a workshop based on the outcomes we're trying to achieve in conversations with the client. So the leader might be talking about some of the things that they've identified could improve within that team. Or more often than not, I do a short online survey with my clients, which the team members fill in. What's going well, where can we improve, what's some things we could be prioritizing in our work, and then how can I then bring that in based on what I know about that team, the individuals, and more broadly the organization. So no, it's more around the outcomes.
And still, you mentioned that the Strengths Finder is just a tool.
Yeah.
So how would you use then these tools to drive that outcome?
So I'm really mindful that the Strengths Finder is a very valuable tool for us to understand ourselves and others. But I'm also mindful that I'm 48. I've worked for a number of years and gathered a range of experiences, models, and tools along the way. And whilst I'm really passionate about strengths, I don't want that to blinker me to not think that's the panacea, the answer for everything. So I definitely see there's value in people knowing their strengths and the strengths of others. And that's more often than not one of the core elements in the content of my workshops. However, if there's something that's around clarity, or there's something around efficiency or communication, or how we manage our stakeholders, I'm a bit like, I think about Tom Cruise from that movie Minority Report, if you might remember, and he's like got that computer in front of him that's set in the future and it's all in the air, and he's moving his hands around and he's like, I'm going to bring this down and bring that down and move that around. I feel like that as a facilitator sometimes, we need this right now, or we might bring that in. So I hope that makes sense in that, yes, strengths are really valuable, but we've got to be mindful that it's about the outcomes and what needs to come into the discussion to help achieve those outcomes.
Yeah, makes total sense. Because otherwise you also if you get too dogmatic, then you might shift the conversation into an area that might not really help in this specific moment.
Yeah, and I think the other learning I've had, and I know many facilitators have had this one, I'd love to know your perspective. Often it's about, let's just have a deep conversation as a team that we're just not having about something, and creating a safe space for that conversation to happen. And yes, strengths might help that conversation happen, because now I'm appreciating your perspective and you appreciating mine. So that's really good. But honestly, so often I think teams just aren't having those conversations they need to have. And so as facilitators, we have this beautiful privilege to create this safe space for those conversations to happen.
Yeah. And to guide the conversation so that they still lead to the expected outcome without just dissolving into this, oh, let's have a kumbaya happy time.
Yeah. And I think what has done a disservice in the past, it was this rah, rah, rah in the day and everyone feels great. The endorphins are flowing and, oh, that was just fantastic. We just did a trust fall and walked off a bridge and blah, blah, blah. And then you just go back to work and it's the exact same environment. And I'll mention Paul again, Paul, the leader of that training company. I remember him saying to me, nearly 15 years ago, that he'd seen teams perform worse after an offsite event because there was no shift in behavior and there was no embedding of the learnings and the tools. And even team members got an insight and a taste of what's possible, and then they go back into the same environment and they feel worse. They feel dejected because that's what we could have had, and now we're back to this again.
Wow. I can totally see that. And what comes to my mind is, what does it mean for the current working from home crisis that we're suffering or maybe enjoying? Because it changed so much in the routines. And I think for a lot of teams, they really explored also different ways of communication. I realized that many teams now take more time to just explore how they are feeling. So the simple question, how are you doing, takes up sometimes half an hour because everyone struggles to express and feels the need. What can we do to bring this new form of communication back into our business routines once we're back in the office?
Yeah, and I appreciate you struggle to say, like, we can't say back to normal or the new normal because we still don't know what it is. Yeah. And I think there's so much good that is coming out of these current working arrangements and teams working the way they are. Talking to teams that I'm working with at the moment, some of the themes that are coming out are we are talking more often with more clarity. And when we're talking on a Zoom chat or something like that, I've got your attention, you've got my attention. It's not like we're just passing each other in the hallway or in the kitchen. We're really listening to each other. They're also talking more frequently in a way that is helping them move forward faster and more agile in projects. So we're not waiting to have a meeting in a fortnight or something like that. So that's also happening. The other thing I think you said that is so true, people are showing genuine care for each other, which I think has been lost a little. And so that genuine care, people are inviting people into their homes via Zoom. They might be in their kitchen or their bedroom or the lounge room. Yet here we are in our tracksuit pants and I'm at work and you're seeing me and you're seeing my house. So there's this vulnerability and connection, and which is so good. That I love how that is strengthening teams. I was quoted from a client recently about a survey they heard that was done in Australia, and I assume it's going to be pretty consistent. The results of the survey were, of the people surveyed, how many of them wanted life to go back the way it was before this happened? The answer was only 9%.
I am not surprised at all.
Hi, this is Andrew. I'm a facilitator and head of customer success at Session Lab, the dynamic workshop planner tool. More than 30,000 facilitators, trainers, and coaches use our workshop planner tool and save time and effort in the design process. So, how do they do it? Our drag and drop agenda builder makes it easy to transform your ideas into high-quality workshops, and the timing of your agenda automatically updates when you make changes. You can collaborate in real time with your colleagues and easily share professional-looking printouts with your clients. And if you need inspiration, you can check out our library of more than 500 activities and exercises and simply drag the ones you need right into your workshop agenda. So check out Session Lab to save time and effort in your workshop design process. And now get your first 2 months of Session Lab Pro absolutely free at sessionlab.com/workshopswork.
And still, to come back to this example of Paul, how can we avoid that we're coming back to the offices with the hope that something might have changed and then falling into this hall of disappointment because all this vulnerability, the genuine care the focus, attention is suddenly gone because everyone goes back into the routine?
So I'm a big believer that leadership sets the culture more than any other factor, whether it's through overt or covert messages our leaders in businesses make. They influence the culture. So leaders play a very, very important role in any cultural change and any change within business, and they play an extremely important role in the new normal, the new world, whatever it looks like when we're back at work in some way. And that role is understanding what people want in the way they want to work going forward. Because if it's different significantly to what they've been experiencing and liking, disengagement is going to go through the roof. You're going to have turnover. You're going to have other absentees and presenteeism issues. So leaders need to understand that and work with their teams and work within the operational requirements to say, how do we make this work and take what was good and continue that? And maybe what wasn't so helpful, and how do we actually address that as well? So I think leaders play such an important role in listening to their teams, and teams also being proactive and talking about that and bringing that up as well. They can't just sit there and say, you come and tell me or ask me, but teams have got it's got to be bottom up and top down.
This went through my mind. Like, is it really that we have to rely on the leaders and just hope for the best that they have the awareness and the leadership skills to drive us back from online back to offline? And what role does maybe self-leadership play? Because I think one observation that was quite striking for me in this new remote environment is that you have to become active in asking for help and reaching out to people, because otherwise you simply get forgotten.
Yeah. Well, I think what it has shown too, that how important trust is in that relationship. So people are now working from home where previously organizations might have had a you can't work from home policy, but now you are. And so I need to trust you, and that trust needs to go both ways. So, and with trust becomes empowerment. So, empowered, and also you're going to be held accountable. So for all that to work, for all that to happen, there's a two-way conversation. There's two-way communication that needs to happen. And I totally echo what you're saying. Leaders play a very important role, but there's also self-leadership. And this is what I need. This is what works for me. And this is how I can contribute to the team to achieve our goals right now.
Yeah. Another observation, I would be very curious of your opinion, is that it seems more difficult to hold the space for difficult conversations when we are online. So when I picture, and you mentioned that, how can we really give the space to the team to go deep and to talk, and maybe also to point out conflicts when they're in the same physical room? It's kind of, they're breathing the same air. I don't know what it is, but everyone sticks around. Nobody gets up and runs away.
I've had a couple, but that's when I was learning.
But it's even more difficult in a working from home environment. What is it and why? So
you raise a really good point for facilitators to think that they take what they do face to face and just replicate it online. It's not going to work. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to sit here and say I've got it all worked out, because I haven't. I'm not continuously learning, but what I do know works. And what's really important is the attitudes that people bring to a workshop face to face will drive their behavior, and those attitudes and mindsets. So that's no different than to the attitudes and mindsets that might be happening in an online workshop and those online tough conversations we need to have. So let's talk about the online workshop first. And I think that for any team event, any workshop, whatever it might be, that communication from a facilitator, from a leader, is just so important. And about what are we doing, and here's some information, and here's what we're hoping to achieve, and what do you want? And so we're starting to bring people on the journey even before we start in front of the screen. And then facilitators play a very important role in those online sessions of creating a safe space for people to talk up. I've got a client at the moment where with the team we're doing 4 2-hour workshops every 2 weeks. And I was going through the process of thinking, what am I going to cover in each one? And I was very mindful for the first one. I didn't cover anything at all for the first half an hour. So I thought, I'm just going to lose half an hour. I'm going to invest that half an hour more wisely around how we're going to work for these next 4 sessions and how we're going to show up, not bang straight into content. So I think that is something that's so important for leaders or anyone that are having those conversations one-on-one that may be a little tough online. I think, again, it's around providing the context, just like you would for a workshop, about the context, about what it is I want to talk to you about, what's my intent, and even maybe calling it out and saying, I know this might be a bit difficult right now because we're doing it via Zoom, but let's talk about this because it is just an important conversation we need to have. Like, there's that context and before you get into the content. And I think, again, from a strengths perspective, if you know the strengths of the other person, you can start to make some understanding or start to tap into the ways they may approach this conversation to help you meet them in the middle and understand how they might be seeing that.
When you mentioned context, I just realized that online we must be much more aware of the timing for the conversation. So if we schedule a call for a difficult conversation around lunchtime, maybe this person is hungry, maybe the children are running around, maybe the kitchen table needs to get ready, so they're in a rush and they have additional distraction.
Yes.
Additional to the screen. Whereas if it's end of the day or early morning, so all these times mean different things depending on their specific context. So maybe the framing and the timing of these conversations is even more important in a remote environment. Because you can just close the door and assume that you leave all the distractions out.
Yeah. Well, I actually think there's a really nice link to your comment earlier around the care. When someone asks, how are you? And let's talk about that and let's unpack that and show that true care for someone that you work with or you might lead. I think there's a good link there to the care and the difficult conversations. That I want to show you that care. I want to care for you and also want to have a difficult conversation. So in my journey, when I was the L&D manager, I worked for a large organization managing training for about 4.5 years. And I never forget the CEO said to me one day, so this was a CEO of about 1,200 people. And he said to me, he said, Murray, my job is just to care and challenge.
Nice.
And I want to care for you, make sure you're well, that you're safe and your family's well. I'm going to challenge you to do your job and do it better.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought he just so beautifully summed up what leadership's about. And I think you made me think of it, honestly. It just popped into my head about what we are exploring at the moment right now, what's going on in the world and people working remotely, that, yes, we're going to show that care. And I'm also going to challenge you to deliver.
Yes, and it's striking me because it seems like they're the two sides of the same coin, because care without challenge is almost meaningless because it leaves you with this illusion of, oh, everything is going to be fine. And this maybe warm shower of, okay, it's comfortable, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And challenge without care leaves you anxious.
Yeah, anxious, stressful, and you've got a boss that's just on top of you all the time or something. Yeah. So you're right. I agree. There's both sides of the same coin.
Yeah. According to you, what makes a workshop fail?
Oh, we sort of covered this a bit earlier. I've seen two things which I think haven't helped. One would be following the agenda like a robot and not working with the needs of the participants. Yes, there's an outcome we want to get to, but I would say it's when we're not considering what's come up and do we need to explore that. An example of that would be if someone's doing an experiential activity and lunch is ready and we don't conduct the debrief because we've got to move on to lunch. And I think that's just a big, big problem because the debrief is where the gold is. That's where the conversations are. That's where we talk about what's our learning and how do we apply that. So lunch can wait. So as a quick side note, whenever I'm running a workshop that's being catered, and I'll speak to the events people, and is the catering going to be hot? So I know, do I have that bit of flex time? You know, are we getting sandwiches or are we getting hot pies? I need to know. So that's one thing. If we just follow it robotically and follow the agenda. The second thing would, or there's a couple now, you got me thinking. One would be if we try and jam too much into the agenda, and it's just like so much content, and there's all of the what, but there's none of the how and the why. So yeah, when we've got too much into it, and people leave and their head's spinning going, well, I don't know what all that was about. It was just all this stuff. So I'd say that's the second one. The third one is a different one, but you just made me think of it and just pondering this. And that is when you are co-facilitating. And I've co-facilitated quite a number of workshops, and I love it when it works, where you are learning and you're feeding off each other to really create that learning environment for the participants. But when it doesn't work is when there's this unhealthy competition and not that collaboration between co-facilitators. And unfortunately, I've witnessed where someone was facilitating and the next facilitator came up and said, I've got to cover all that Miriam just did because she didn't cover it very well. Yeah. So not only was that uncomfortable for the facilitators, you can sense that, again, that energy in the room and that shift, because the participants are like, what's going on? Who do we listen to? What's happening? And we're losing them. So yeah, that wasn't good either.
Because it threatens the safe space.
Yes.
And it puts the participants in this position where they have to choose to be loyal. They don't know whom to trust and what is actually right. In German, we have a word that is called Fremdscham, which means to be ashamed on behalf of someone else.
Oh, I love that. You have to send me the spelling of that one. I love that.
And this is when I heard your example, as a participant, I would feel this, oh my goodness, I'm ashamed on behalf of this person. How can he put the other person in this situation? And this just destroys the entire energy. Good example.
I totally agree. Please send me that word. I love that.
I will. Another question that I always ask is, what is your favorite exercise?
So I probably won't have enough time to go through it in detail, but it's an exercise I've been using since when I first started. So 13 odd years. And it's an exercise with a tent pole, and you get the tent pole, and the name of the exercise is helium sticks. And it's because as everyone stands, have you done this activity?
Not yet.
You have the tent pole out, people stand in 2 rows facing each other, and they have the tent pole sits on top of their finger, and they all hold the fingers out straight. And the aim, the objective is to lower that tent pole as a group, with everyone maintaining contact with their fingers only underneath the tent pole to the floor. And for this activity to work, everyone needs to be connected and aligned, but also only focusing on what's in their control and their fingers. And it's called helium sticks because 99% of the time, everyone is so keen to not let go of the tent pole because you have to maintain contact. It has to stay sitting on your fingers. They're so keen to maintain that contact, they push it up and push it up and push it up and push it up. And I've seen hundreds of times with people standing with this tent pole above their head, and then they're blaming the short ones, they're blaming the tall ones, they're blaming someone else. And it just blows up. And then I'll say, does this reflect anything in your teams? Yes, it does. And then we go, okay, let's reset. I could tell you so many stories about this activity, and I'm happy to share you the instructions. I've seen it take over 40 minutes with people crying and swearing and stamping their feet, grown adults, mind you, because of how frustrated they're getting. I've also seen it take 5 minutes with a very strong, intact team with clear leadership and an aligned approach where they all focus on what's in their control and they work together and got it down. And when you see the shift from the blame and the below the line behaviors and pushing it up to the let's work together, there's a change not just in the language and the way they're talking and communicating, but also the energy in the room and the way they're working together. And it's honestly a great activity. And For a traveling facilitator, a tent pole you can fit in your backpack or your suitcase, and it's fine because it's light and small. Funny side story, sorry, Miriam. I was at customs in Sydney airport, security check, walking through security check in the airport, and my bag got pushed aside because they detected some object. And I just thought to myself, it's going to be the tent poles because they look a bit weird, this long tent pole in my bag. And they brought it out and they said, what's this in here? And I opened up my bag and I saw it's a tent pole. And the security guy goes, it's the tent pole activity. You're a trainer. We've done that before. It's great. Yeah, you can go. He knew exactly what it was for. It was so funny.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think it's through this experience, this aha moment, where you realize, is this really how we are behaving as a team?
Yeah. And I feel privileged sometimes that I've helped a team come to that aha moment, that collective aha moment of that awareness of how they are behaving. And I believe this activity is a way to magnify that and help that come out and for people to own their stuff. And there's some really great links there with strengths around how am I showing up day in, day out, and how am I showing up in this activity. And then the debrief quite often is, and nearly for all activities, I would say the debrief time is just as long as it takes to go for the activity. Like I've had a debrief go for 40 minutes after the activity was for 40 minutes because we're really talking about understanding it and how do we use this going forward. Which
makes sense because if the team is intact, the activity is shorter and then the debrief is shorter. But if the team struggles, it takes longer. And then obviously you need more time to figure it out and to show a way forward.
To wipe up the tears.
Yeah. Wonderful. And now I wanted to link back to the conversation point we had before and how to take the learnings from the remote experience back into the office. How can we create these light bulb moments to really raise awareness of what happened, what shifted, and what it takes to bring it back?
So you remind me of something that's really important when I was talking about the role of leaders. And I've worked with a number of teams over the years where they've said, we've done things before and they haven't stuck, and they're pointing the finger at the leader. Nothing happened. And it's like I've then come in now to have a workshop with this team where a couple of years ago they've done something off-site or some event and nothing stuck, nothing was implemented or not much. And they're pointing the finger. And I think your point earlier links to this really well, which it isn't up to the leader. The leader, yes, obviously plays a role, but each person makes the culture of the team. And those aha moments, okay, so what am I going to do about this as an individual when I'm back in my work environment the next day, whenever that is? So what's the aha I've had around the way I communicate, the way I support, the way I ask for help, the language I use, the way I show up in conversations, or the way that we work together, the way I appreciate you. There's all of that, those behaviors of a team. And how am I as an individual making a commitment to my team members to actually implement that? So there's a number of strategies in that debrief process of, large groups, pair discussions, small groups, and bringing that together, but getting that to a place of, yes, this is what we're all agreeing and committing to going forward, which is so important. Yeah. And then checking in. I think, and quite often it's me or it's the team doing that. And I'll say to them, so how are you going to talk about this at your next team meeting and the one after that and the one after that? Like how are you keeping not just operational things, but our team environment as well?
And to create this ritual and narrative of how to communicate like that. Is there something, I'm sure there's a lot that we haven't covered in our conversation, but is there something that you would like to share before we wrap it up?
Something I would like to share. So we did talk about strengths and we talked about there's an assessment, like there's many assessments out there. If someone's thinking about, I just want to know what my strengths are, yes, they can go and do that assessment. And it's, to be honest, one of the least expensive investments for a self-awareness test. And people can check that out, the Clifton Strengths Assessment. However, I'd actually invite people to think about another way to identify their strengths. And there's a few questions there, and that is to actually take the time out to reflect about what truly energizes you and what comes easy to you. So when you might start a new task or a new process and you just have this thirst for learning and you just take onto it very easily, it's quite often called moments of rapid learning. So you're just grasping that quite easily. Even what do you crave to do? So what are you craving or yearning to do? And what puts you into that state of flow and that zone of genius? So I think so often as facilitators and as people, we're going through life of just the next thing. We've got to take the time out to pause and think about these elements, and then also add to it, what do I procrastinate on? What do I resist, to see what else maybe isn't? And then you're starting to tap into when you're at your best and what are your strengths and who could you partner with or who could you collaborate with, and where could you systemize to help you so you can focus more on your strengths and what you do.
To basically find this complement, someone who complements on your strengths so that you can be this effective co-facilitation couple.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'd invite people to take the time out to do that pause, and hopefully you have that time now to think about those things and to take the time to identify what they are. My aim with the people I work with is that we are living a life where we're getting to live using our strengths and be at our best the most we can every day. And part of that is understanding what is the things that I do that help me feel like that and give me the chance to do that.
Yeah. And maybe this is a beautiful homework to do now for the end of this remote time. After we spend so much time with ourselves.
Yes.
It's maybe the best moment to actually see, okay, what have I been procrastinating? I know that I could have done so much, but I didn't. What held me back? And when was I in this flow that you described?
Yeah, that flow of time standing still or time going super fast, and you instinctively know what to do next.
Yeah. Nice homework. I would do that.
Yes.
Thank you for the inspiration. If someone fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up and doesn't have time to listen to the entire show again, what would you like them to take away from this hour-long conversation?
That is such a good question. I would like them to take away, I feel like we covered quite a bit.
Yeah.
I would like to think that, yes, there's power in knowing your strengths and taking the time to understand what they are and doing that. That's one thing. Second thing is taking the time to really show up, whether that's show up online in the conversations we talked about or show up as a facilitator. And what I mean by that is to really take note of what's happening around you, not just pushing through. And we talked a bit about that. And lastly, I would say that it's all a journey. We're all learning, and I'm definitely learning. And I think the more that we be comfortable with not making ourselves and other people wrong, and that we're all in a learning process, is going to help us a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam, for letting me come and chat to you. And I would like to come back at some stage because I love talking to you.
Yes, wonderful. Because in your final words, you already made the introduction for the next. Because I would love to tap more into this. How can we avoid being triggered by participants and playing the blame game?
Yes, we had a very good chat about that too. I agree.
Wonderful. So we'll be scheduled for the next.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.